Shabbat Shalom. Mia, your decision to start your Devar Torah with a Taylor Swift quote inspired me to go down the music route. So I want to tell you about one of the best-known songs from the 1980s, and that is Every Breath You Take from the Police. It's a great song. But if you stop and listen to it, really listen to it, there are some issues there. Now, I don't mean the fact that it feels a bit like the person who is singing the song is a stalker, right? Every breath you take, every move you make, every step you take, I'll be watching you. I apologize if this was your wedding song, all right? But you got to rethink these things sometimes. I mean, there are sound issues. There are vocal issues, like the pitch in Sting's voice, which gets a little pitchy sometimes. Or instrumental issues. The tempo drifts a bit, and I could show you, if I had a screen, a digital mapping of the song, and you would see some of these issues very clearly. Now, you may disagree with me about the greatness of the song or the greatness of the band. Perhaps it's not your taste. But to suggest that the Police can't play, or that Sting can't sing, or that it's a bad, anything other than a classic song because of the things I've highlighted would be foolish. In fact, I think it's a better song because of its imperfections. Auto-tune, remastering, remixing, dubbing, etc. has done to music in the digital format what Photoshop or Instagram apps have done for pictures. We've airbrushed all the imperfections out of the recordings, and I think that our music is a lot poorer for it. Now, I don't know whether Sting chose to leave this excellent song imperfect or not, but I do know one artist who consciously made the choice to leave his work unfixed, unfinished, and imperfect. In his new book, Deliver Me From Nowhere, The Making of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, author Warren Zane describes the release of this record, Nebraska, as one of American music's great left turns. In 1982, Springsteen was coming off a very successful world tour promoting his first #1 album, The River. He was ready to become a superstar. He knew it. His manager knew it. The world knew it. But rather than embrace this destiny, his destiny, and record what would eventually become, Born in the USA, a massively successful album with 7 top 10 singles, tying it with Thriller in the 80s. He records, in making this left turn, a record so sparse, so different than anything he had done thematically or genre-wise. Think Hank Williams acoustic guitar, not the Born to Run rock, arena rock, that some might think of when they think of Springsteen. He records the record Nebraska, a record he made sitting on the edge of his bed in his rental house in Colts Neck, New Jersey, using basically a glorified cassette player. For those of you who don't know what a cassette player is, parents, please explain after this service. Now, Zane's book for Springsteen fans is like candy, and it raises all kinds of questions about this moment in his career. There was a time when he was deep in thought about the kind of music he wanted to create, the kind of stories he wanted to tell, the type of artist he wanted to be. There's no doubt that this was a pivotal moment in his career, and doing the hard work of making this record and releasing it allowed him to go to the next level, record Born in the USA, make him a household name. But for the purpose of this morning, I want to explore why he chose to release the music basically as he recorded it on his cassette player. No mixing, no polishing it up, no raising the sound levels, no going to the power station in New York City, its fancy state-of-the-art recording studio, and recording it the way you might think it should have been done. It was, and it is, rough. Too rough to really gain any traction on commercial rock stations. And yet, for so many, including Bruce himself, it is his greatest and most definitive record. He tells Zane, every time we went to improve it, we lost the characters, their frailty, their humanness, their conflicts, their troubles. Zane continues, you couldn't hear them when he cleaned up the recording, not in the way that Springsteen wanted them to be heard. So he released the record as it was, deeply flawed. It was recorded on a cheap cassette tape. Bruce carried that cassette tape around in his pocket for months, mixed it into or onto a malfunctioning boombox, and that's what you heard, and that's what you hear when you bought it. And there it is, one of life's great truths. The idea that the pursuit of perfection is actually or can be a stumbling block to achieving excellence or really goodness. And it's a lesson we encounter in our own tradition right at the dawn of creation. As children, we were taught that Adam and Eve were punished and sent out to the Garden of Eden forever because, why? They ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The one tree they weren't permitted. I mean, who wouldn't have guessed that if you're reading along? In Rabbi Harold Kushner's book, How Good Do We Have to Be? And I quote him not because it's an excellent book, because he just passed away and his legacy is towering for rabbis. This brilliant teacher, preacher, and writer provides us with a different lens through which to view and understand what is our foundational narrative of creation. He writes, and I quote, the account of Adam and Eve eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, as I see it, is a mythical description of how the first human beings left the world of animal existence behind and entered the problematic world of being human. It is the biblical account of evolution, seeing the difference between humans and animals in moral rather than in anthropological terms. Might it even be, Kushner hypothesizes, might it even be that God wanted Adam and Eve to eat the fruit, though God knew it would make their lives painful and complicated, and winced at the pain they would be condemning themselves to by eating from this tree. Kushner is suggesting that the story of the Garden of Eden is not a story of paradise lost, of people being punished for having made one mistake, expelled from paradise because in that moment they weren't perfect. It is the story of the first human being graduating, evolving from the relatively uncomplicated world where everything is provided for you. It's a state of bliss. It's a state of perfection. Moving on out of there to the immensely complicated and imperfect world that we inhabit today. To be fully human, Kushner teaches, means to live outside of paradise where perfection is always elusive. This tension that we hold of living in the perfection of the garden versus living in what we'll call the real world, well, that resurfaces in this week's Torah reading. The Israelites are wandering through the wilderness. We know the story. They send scouts into the land to investigate the population, gauge the possibility of actually overcoming them and defeating them in battle, the Canaanites, so that they can take over the land. 10 of the 12 scouts return. They say, forget it. There's no way. there is no way we can do this. The people in the land are giants, and we are small like grasshoppers. And the people, of course, believe them. And the question is why? After all the miracles that they have seen and experienced in the wilderness, why would they not think that God would somehow fight their fight and get them into the land? And I think the answer is to be found in the word grasshopper. When they say they were small like grasshoppers, the conventional way to understand it is that it's a statement about self-esteem. It's not that they saw themselves as weak, as incapable. Another understanding of being small like grasshoppers is that they actually, literally, saw themselves as small, infantile. They saw themselves as children, totally dependent on God for food, for sustenance, for protection. And guess what? They liked it. And why not? They didn't have to do anything. The wilderness for them was their perfection. It was their Garden of Eden. If they entered the land, a land of imperfection, well, they would have to fight battles. They'd have to maintain an army, create an economy, farm the land, worry about the weather, worry about their crops, and all the thousands of distractions that come from living in the world. They would have to develop agency. They would have to make choices, tough choices, and they might fail. And this was paralyzing to the Israelites, because what freedom meant to them, at least according to Rashi, the medieval commentator, was freedom from mitzvot, freedom from obligations, freedom from responsibility. In other words, what the Israelites were really complaining about when they complain in this week's Torah portion, when they cry out to God, was God's expectation that they transform from being totally dependent on God to becoming independent human beings. For this immature, childlike group of former slaves, that was too much. Unable to embrace their imperfections and the imperfections of their surroundings, unable to understand that doing so would be their path to redemption and freedom, well, they became doomed to wander in the wilderness, to die out there. It would be their children, born into freedom, who were prepared to leave the security and the comfort of the wilderness, enter the unknown landscape of the promised land, and build a future there. How tempting it is for all of us to remain in our safe spaces. How comfortable it is to stay in our own garden, our own paradise, our own places that feel perfect to us. Springsteen could have made that choice in 1982. He could have labored in the studio, a place and a process that was actually very comfortable for him. He could have fixed the imperfections of this record. He is, after all, known to be a perfectionist and exacting when it comes to recording. But he discovered something fascinating with Nebraska. It was in the imperfection that his turbulent message about the world and the characters who inhabit that world, it was in the imperfection that that message would be best communicated. So he released it to the world as it is, as it was recorded. And the album is extraordinary. And perfecting it would have undermined, if not ruined, the message. And after hundreds and hundreds of times of listening to this record, that singular truth continues to reveal itself to me. My colleague, Rabbi Eddie Feinstein, tells a beautiful story about Adam and Eve in his book, Capturing the Moon. After years of struggle, when their children were grown, right? No more tuition, no more worry, no more parenting the way you do in the intense years of parenting. Adam and Eve decided to travel the world, to see the world, to live. And in the course of their journeys, they actually found the entrance to the Garden of Eden, the story goes, now guarded by an angel with a flaming sword. And they were frightened, and they began to flee when God spoke to them, Adam, Eve, you've lived in exile all these years. Your work is done. Your exile is finished. You've toiled long enough. Come back. Come back to the garden. And the gate to the garden opened up. But Adam had grown wary during this time. Wait, he says to God, it's been a long time since I've been here. Can you remind me, what's this paradise like? God says, in this paradise, there's no work. You never need to struggle. You never need to toil. You never need to work again. In this garden, there's no pain. There's no suffering. Here, in this paradise, death doesn't exist. Day after day, life will go on for eternity. Come, my children, come home. Come back to the garden. No work, no struggle, no pain, Adam heard. An endless life of ease. And then he turned and he looked to his wife. He looked at Eve. He looked at the woman with whom he had struggled to make a life, to take wheat from the earth and turn it into bread, to create a family, to raise children, to build a home together. He thought of the struggles. He thought of the challenges that they overcame, the joys, the memories that they cherished, the suffering they endured, and the love, the grace they had found. And Adam looked at God. Adam shook his head, and he said, no, thank you. Not now. Come on, Eve. Let's go home. And hand in hand, Adam and Eve turned their backs on paradise. They turned their backs on the Garden of Eden, turned their backs on perfection, and they continued their journey home. So may we all. Shabbat Shalom.